former Vice Chief of Staff of the Army and Chairman of the Institute for the Study of War. General, great to have you with us today. That reporting was discussion of, we know part of these defense packages will include, as we heard from the foreign minister in Germany, long-range missiles, which would obviously be able to reach places like Moscow. And the president deflected that conversation, or his press secretary deflected that conversation about whether he was asking Zelensky if he would use those long-range missiles to reach Moscow. What do you make of this conversation, this back and forth, General?
Yeah, well, I mean, the president really never refuses the opportunity to answer questions, but it doesn't necessarily get at complicated policy issues. I think, in my mind, when I look at what the question asked and then what his response is, he doesn't think Zelensky should be targeting the people in Moscow. That's what I think the issue is here. Mm-hmm. If there's a legitimate military target in the vicinity of Moscow, which Zelensky and his people have gone after in the past, I think certainly that is fair game. So I don't think that's a reflection of a policy issue. It's just the president trying to interpret a question and answer it to the best of his ability. Look, at every weapon that we have given Ukraine and every weapon that the Europeans have given them, they're all used to defend themselves against an invasion force. I mean, they have U.S. F-16 aircraft there. There's actually retired F-16 pilots flying some of those airplanes, Americans. That could obviously be considered an offensive weapon. But the reality is they're all conducting defensive operations against an invasion force. And certainly, if there are bases that are providing aircraft, and the Ukrainians can attack those bases where the airplanes are before they fly over their cities and drop the bombs, and they have to wait until they get over the cities to attack them, which one of those is a better answer? I mean, it's obvious to anybody. So we got to get a big picture here in terms of what is really happening. Certainly, Ukraine should never, and they have not been limited to only attack something that's inside of Ukraine, when a lot of capability is coming from Russia itself. All right, and certainly their logistical infrastructure is fair game as well.
Two quick questions, if I can. You just said that there are retired U.S. Air Force pilots who are flying over Russia on behalf of Ukraine?
No, they're flying F-16s in Ukraine on behalf of Ukraine. I don't know if they go outside of Ukraine or not. I think the reason why they wanted the F-16s primarily because it's a good aircraft that provides good air defense, and the electronic means that it has is very sophisticated. So, yeah, they're part of the defensive structure protecting the people and the troops in Ukraine.
All right. In terms of these drone attacks on Ukraine and how Ukraine can defend themselves against these, it's my understanding that the latest generation of Russian drones has the ability to be undetected over Ukraine. And tell me about how that's going in terms of Ukraine's ability to deflect those incoming drones and these Patriot missiles and how they will protect their ability to have air defense over Ukraine.
Well, Russia does not have stealth drones, but many drones are susceptible to electronic warfare. In other words, you separate the person that's controlling that drone, the messages that they're sending to them, you jam that. And that's an effective way of taking drones down. The reality is that drone technology, Martha, is advancing so rapidly, it's hard for both forces to kind of keep up with it. As an example, on the front lines, if you're a soldier and you can be seen, you can be killed. If you're a tank, same thing. Artillery piece, same thing. Command and control. One of the things the Russians have done is they've started using optic cable wires, very thin wires, that fly the drone out 15 to 20 miles so that it can't be interfered with, because the message is being sent by the wire and not through the air in terms of a radio wave.
Yeah.
The technology is changing right before our eyes here. But listen, counter drone technology is a major issue for the United States. We saw what happened at those bases in Russia. That could happen in the United States to our bases as well. Israel demonstrated very much the same thing with drones against Iran, that they put into Iran, and from Iran itself, they attacked Iran's capabilities. We have to get a counter-drone strategy in this country. And just recently, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, has approved that. The Chief of Staff of the Army recommended it. And this is a huge step forward here that we're going to have to form to be able to do that, to take care of our bases and infrastructure in the United States, as well as our troops that are deployed overseas.
Absolutely.
Complicated stuff, to be sure.
It sure
But
is.
we got to get on with it.
Well, yeah, I'm not, it doesn't give me a lot of confidence that you're saying that we're behind in that, and we do definitely have to become more dominant in that field. We'll take your word for it on that, General. Thank you very much.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.